Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabrashalieva, along with co-host Dr. Viktor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post any questions for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Viktor Fett.
Thank you very much, Anara. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Volodymyr Viatrovych from Kyiv joining us. He is a Ukrainian historian, publicist, and member of Parliament of Ukraine, Verkhovna Rada. He is the author of 12 books, co-author of 9 more. His works have been translated into English, Polish, Czech. He has been director of the Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance, and earlier as director of archives of the Security Service of Ukraine. He opened the KGB archives to the public. He was a senior visiting scholar at the Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute in 2010-11. He also lectured in the National University of Kyiv and Ukrainian Catholic University. He has been a member of the Ukrainian Parliament since 2019, representing the European Solidarity political party faction. He initiated the law establishing a special pension for political prisoners of the communist regime. And Dr. Viatrovych also is co-author of laws banning the propaganda and symbols of Russian imperial policy, supporting Ukrainian publishers and bookstores. He has also co-authored parliamentary resolutions honoring Ukrainians who saved Jews during World War II. Dr. Viatrovych, we're honored to have you. Please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you for invitation, and I try to speak about a very important subject, why history matters for understanding Russia's war against Ukraine. Then we will have some Q&A session. The properly assess Russia's current war against Ukraine, it's not enough to follow the frontline diplomacy or daily news. We need to understand history. History explains the logic of Russia's action, the motives behind Ukrainian resistance, and the real stakes of this war. Without historical perspective, it is easy to misjudge the causes of the war, its possible course, and the prospects for peace. Vladimir Putin has long demonstrated a particular interest in history. But for him, history is not merely an object of curiosity. He sees himself as a politician called upon to correct historical mistakes. One of the greatest such mistakes, in his view, was the collapse of the Soviet Union. He publicly stated this in 2007, and already in 2008, Russia launched war against Georgia. This was a clear signal. For the Kremlin, historical revisionism is not just rhetoric, it's a program of action. For Putin, the very existence of independent Ukraine is historical anomaly. In his worldview, Ukraine was either artificially created by the Bolsheviks or emerged as a result of Western conspiracy after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He repeated these ideas for years in speeches and interviews, and in 2021 systematized them in his article on the historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians. That text became an ideological preparation for the full-scale invasion of 2022. On the night of February 24, Putin essentially repeated its main points when announcing the beginning of the so-called special military operation. For the Russian authorities, history is not only a way to justify aggression. It performs at least three practical functions. It mobilizes Russian society for war, it disorients and divides Ukrainians, and it discredits Ukraine internationally. In other words, history, or more precisely a set of myths presented as history, becomes a weapon in Russian hands. The central message of the Kremlin is denial of the existence of a separate Ukrainian nation. This is not a new idea. It has been at the core of Russian imperial thinking for centuries. If Ukrainians and Russians are supposedly one people, then, from the Kremlin point of view, Ukraine does not need its own states. This myth is the foundation for justification of the annexation of Crimea and for the claim that Russia's war against Ukraine is supposedly an internal conflict rather than aggression by one state against other. To justify its claims, the Kremlin relies primarily on the three historical themes: the legacy of Kievan Rus, next is imperial colonization of southern and eastern Ukraine in the 18th century, and the last, the Second World War presented exclusively throughout the Soviet myth as a great patriotic war. All these narratives serve not an academic but political function, to prove that Ukrainian allegedly has no separate history, no separate state tradition, and no independent right to exist. Russia's attempt to monopolize the legacy of Rus is not merely about making its own history appear older. It is one of the key elements of its imperial claim to Kyiv and to Ukrainian lands in general. Likewise, the myth of Novorossiya is meant to pursue audience that civilization in southern and eastern Ukraine appeared only thanks to the Russian Empire. The previous history of this territory within the Ukrainian political formation and the Crimean Khanate is ignored. The past is deliberately simplified in order to justify present-day expansion. The most important instrument of historical propaganda for modern Russia is the myth of Great Patriotic War. In Putin's Russia, it has become almost a civil religion, with its own rituals, symbols, and cult of victory. The memory of the war is used not to reflect on tragedy, but to cultivate aggressive militarism. That is why the Kremlin presents the current war against Ukraine as continuation of struggle against Nazism, and why one of the declared goals of this war invasion was denazification. Ignorance of Ukrainian history comes at a high price. It's helped Russia propaganda spread the false idea that Russia cannot be an aggressor because it once participated in the victory over Nazism. It also became one of reasons for the mistaken predictions at the beginning of 2022, when many Western experts expected Kyiv to fall within days. Because of this, some politicians doubted whether Ukraine should receive serious military assistance, fearing that such aid would soon fall into Russian hands. In fact, Ukrainian history provides strong grounds for different conclusion. Ukrainians have a powerful tradition of organized resistance even under extremely unfavorable conditions. This is visible both in the insurgent movements of the 20th century and in the more recent experience of self-organization during the Maidans of 2004, of 2013 and 14. This culture of horizontal networks, civic mobilization and responsibility helped Ukraine withstand the first days of full-scale invasion, even before state mechanism began functioning fully and before international assistance started arriving at scale. History is also necessary for understanding what this war is not. It is not simply a conflict over territory. If this were only about territory, Russia would not be destroying the Ukrainian cities it is trying to capture. The Kremlin's goal is deeper and more dangerous: the destruction of Ukrainians as separate nation. This means the physical extermination of some Ukrainians, deportations, repression, and for other forced renunciation of Ukrainian identity. This is why Russia's actions have the features not only of war crimes, but also of genocidal policy. This is a war over identity. It is being fought not only for square kilometers, but for people, for their memory, language, culture, worldview, and right to their own future. If Russia's goal is not simply a part of Ukraine's territory, but the subjection of whole country, the territorial concessions will not solve the problem. They will only postpone the next stage of aggression. Historical experience shows that imperial projects do not stop where concessions are made to them. They stop where they are stopped. This is why the idea that giving up part of Ukrainian territory could be an acceptable price for peace is deeply misleading. Such a compromise would not end the war in any lasting sense. It would merely create conditions for future escalations. Putin will not stop after taking part of Ukrainian territory. He does not need only part of Ukraine. He needs all of Ukraine. And above all, he needs Ukrainians. In Russia's imperial imagination, Ukrainians are supposed to become part of Russian world, a neo-imperial project that cannot be realized without Ukraine. Russian identity in its imperial form cannot imagine itself without Kyiv, Rus, Ukrainian history, and Ukrainians. That is why the denial of Ukraine is not an accidental propaganda thesis, but the core of the Russian imperial project. Putin's 2021 article on so-called historical unity of Russians and Ukrainians was not simply a text about the past. It was, in a sense, a declaration of war against Ukraine's statehood and Ukrainian identity. This is also explained why the war is not fundamentally about land alone. It is a war for identity, memory, and political existence. Today, most Ukrainians understand this war precisely as a war for Ukrainians' right to exist. In 2025, Ukrainian legislation introduced the concept of the War of Independence of Ukraine, a struggle for Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity against the aggression of the Russian Federation that began in 2014. This name is important not only in legal terms. It accurately reflects the goals of both sides. Ukrainians are fighting to preserve independence. Russia is trying to eliminate it. At the same time, this name places the current war within a broader historical context. More than a century of Ukrainian struggle for freedom and statehood. Ukrainians already attempt to build an independent state in 1970. That attempt failed partially because of insufficient international support. The result was the restoration of Russian Empire in the form of Soviet Union, and later the domination of large part of Europe and spread of totalitarian influence far beyond the borders of the USSR. Today, the world has no right to repeat this mistake. Support for Ukraine is needed not only by Ukrainians. It's needed by everyone who does not want to return to a world in which empires once again decide to fight of nations by force. History is not necessary only for academic competence. It is essential for drawing the right political and moral conclusions today. It helps us see that Russia is waging not an ordinary war for influence or territory, but a neo-imperial war aimed at destroying Ukrainian statehood. See that Ukrainian resistance has deep historical roots and substantial internal strengths. See that support for Ukraine is not only an act of solidarity with the victim of aggression, but also a necessary condition for defending a world in which borders, freedom, and law still matter. History teaches us that concessions to empires do not bring lasting peace. They only postpone a larger war. Thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Viatrovych. This is brilliant, and I'm sure we can have a lot of deep questions. Please, comments, questions, anyone? We have time. And thank you again for our wonderful speaker. Please.
I appreciate very much everything you just explained so beautifully and so clearly. This is very helpful to those of us who live in the United States when people ask us, well, why doesn't Ukraine just give up territory? And we try to respond as best we can, but what you've given us is such a clear, strong argument. Ви мене розумієте, правда? Що розумієте? Так. So we're very, very grateful to you. Especially, you made the point that this is a war not over territory, but over identity, memory, language, and culture. This is a very important point that I think sometimes when we appeal to our elected officials to help Ukraine, we miss this. So we need to say more about this. But obviously the most powerful part of your presentation was that territorial concessions don't end wars. And I'm trying to think of ways that we can magnify that message to our elected officials, because there is definitely arguments that I hear from people who care about Ukraine, but like, oh, it'll be peace, just give away Kharkiv, just give away this. It will not be peace. It will never be peace that way. And so not so much a question, just a sincere thank you for giving us a really clear, simple argument why land for peace is not going to work. I see Dean Deutsch. This is Dean Deutsch, has his hand up. He is the former dean of our graduate college at Marshall University. Dean Deutsch, the microphone is yours.
With the changing political situation in Hungary, Orban's defeat, what do you anticipate will be happening in the future as a result of that political upset?
Певні позитивні результати поразки Орбана помітні вже.
There are some very obvious already immediate positive results over Orban's defeat already.
Буквально вчора було оголошено про відкриття нарешті кредиту для України від Європейського Союзу на 90 мільярдів, який блокував безпосередньо Орбан.
For example, yesterday it was voted to free up funds from the 90 billion to million.
Очевидно, що стосунки з Угорщиною не поміняються кардинально дуже швидко,
Relationships with Hungary are not going to change very quickly.
Але принаймні можемо бути певні, що мадяр може виконувати якусь радикальну, можливо, навіть, але проугорську, але не проросійську політику, як це робив Орбан.
But it's pretty obvious that now Hungary will not have the same pro-Russian attitude or positions as Orban.
Найважливіше, що Путін втратив один з найсильніших голосів
Most important is that Putin has lost one of the strongest voices.
Втратив російський голос в Європейському Союзі.
The Russian voice in the European context, European Union.
Але, на жаль, є і погані новини, бо буквально цими ж днями відбулися вибори в Болгарії, в результаті яких до влади прийшли проросійські сили.
But there's also bad news because, for example, in Bulgaria there was elections, and in fact they are favorable to the Russian powers.
Треба розуміти, що Путін буде продовжувати політику, спрямовану на розхитування і розвал Європейського Союзу.
You have to understand that Putin is going to continue to do politics for the destruction of the European Union.
Для нього це зараз принципово важливим, зважаючи на те, що він, по суті, добився призупинення безпосередньої допомоги зі Сполучених Штатів. І єдиним зараз твердим союзником України, який надає відповідну допомогу, є саме Європейський Союз.
Можете повторити то поволіше, першу фразу, ту і другу фразу? Я дуже перепрошую.
Для нього надзвичайно важливо дестабілізувати Європейський Союз.
It's very important for Putin to destabilize the European Union.
Тому що саме Європейський Союз зараз залишився головним постачальником і фінансів, матеріальних ресурсів, і зброї для України.
Because the European Union is now the most important source of funding for weapons and support for Ukraine.
На жаль, нова американська адміністрація фактично зупинила надання допомоги Україні.
Unfortunately, the new American administration has paused the help for Ukraine.
І знову-таки кілька днів тому зробила навіть ще один крок назустріч Путіну, продовживши зупинку санкцій проти нафтових компаній російських.
And has delayed also oil delayed the delivery of oil to Ukraine.
The sanctions.
Sanctions, sorry.
Lifted the sanctions.
Lifted the sanctions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good question about Orban, the impact of Orban's loss of election. Yeah, and I want to apologize to our viewers. I'm good with short phrases, and it's not a language problem. It's an older person memory problem trying to recapture the first words. But I'm very, very grateful to our wonderful speaker. He is saying things so much better than I am conveying them to you.
We have a question from Lubomir Lychuk, Canada. Please, Dr. Lychuk. Open your microphone, please.
Volodymyr, приємно тебе побачити.
Мені теж.
My question is this. You mentioned the 2021 essay ostensibly written by Putin. Let me tell you something interesting about the reaction here in the West that I watched. And then I have a question for you about reaction in Ukraine or the consequences in Ukraine.
Ви розумієте, правда? То що?
Yes, understand.
In 2021, when Mr. Putin's essay appeared, I saw it exactly the way you just described it, as a declaration of war against Ukraine and Ukrainians. And I reached out to several of the better known Ukrainian academics in North America. And you know all of them, with one exception, and that was Professor Mogochi at the Chair of Ukrainian Studies in Toronto. When I said to them, I think this is a very serious document. I see it as a declaration of war. I think we should publish Putin's speech with responses to criticize it. Every single one of them, with the exception of Mogochi, declined and said, this is unimportant. So there was a great naivete, blindness, willful or otherwise, on the part of all of the Ukrainian experts, I put that in quotation marks, in North America to the meaning of the Putin essay at the time. Now, they've since changed. I don't deny that. But at the time, there was a great ignorance. I want to know, if you can think back to 2021, 2022, before the war escalated, how did people in Ukraine react to the essay? That'd be part one of the question. And part two of the question would be,
Fortunately, the same. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainian historians just wrote something about Putin's mistake. Oh, it's one mistake, next mistake, next mistake. It was not serious because nobody want to understand that it's a declaration of war. Just between other politicians in the world, as I know, just one. It was president of Finlandia. He was not president in this time. He is right now president of Finlandia, Alexander Stubb. He wrote about this text, that this is very important. It can be declaration of big war.
I was reminded.
No politics, no historians, nobody take it seriously.
Yeah, I was reminded of how we now know from the perspective of history, which you pointed out we need to study better and understand to know what's happening today. No one took Mein Kampf seriously.
Wow.
Nobody read it, or those who read it said, "Oh, it's just a lunatic," right? And so we have a KGB man in the Kremlin who's no lunatic. He's actually a very smart man, I think, in some ways, who was openly broadcasting his desire to essentially absorb Ukraine and Ukrainians.
By the way, it was very similar to situation in 2007 when Putin made this statement on Munich conference about that collapse of USSR was the greatest catastrophic in human history.
Yeah.
And again, all politicians, all experts don't take it seriously.
Yeah. So the leading from that, Volodymyr, and then I'll stop and let others. Now that there is a war, full-scale war, which in my assessment, Ukraine is winning, but there was a great concern among academics in the West up until 2022 that there was this regional divide between Ukrainians in the center and east, or certainly in the east and in the west. That in the west, yes, Halichina, Bukovina, they're nationalists. In the center, maybe there's something in between. And in the east, they're all pro-Russian. And Ukraine is fragmented. Ukraine is an artificial state, which Putin says, you know, it's a construct. Stalin created it, Lenin.
It's exactly Russian narratives.
Yeah, Russia, Stalin created it, Lenin created it, the Austrians created it, the Germans created it. Everybody's created Ukraine except Ukrainians, apparently. But at any rate, how do people today, in the wake of this full-scale escalation of the war, how do people in Ukraine today, east to west, feel about I'll call it the Russian imperial project?
Okay, I move to Ukrainian. It will be.
Yeah.
Короткі фрази.
Okay. Мені здається, що якраз ця війна продемонструвала абсолютну фальшивість цих тез про розділеність України.
To me, it seems like this war has demonstrated the falsehoods about these divisions within Ukraine.
Тому що зі зброєю в руках захищають Україну зараз українці зі всіх частин.
Because right now, with weapons in hand, Ukraine is being defended by Ukrainians from all parts of Ukraine.
Я часто їжджу по Україні, по всій Україні, і, на жаль, фактично біля кожного села бачу свіжі могили, прикрашені військовими прапорами.
I travel often throughout Ukraine, through all parts of Ukraine, and unfortunately, outside many villages, I see fresh graves of people who've fallen in war.
В роки моєї юності я виростав на Галичині. Такі могили з синьо-жовтими і червоно-чорними прапорами прикрашали могили січових стрільців чи потім вояків УПА, і це було тільки в Західній Україні.
I grew up in Halichina, in the western part, and there were plenty of graves with both the blue and yellow flags and the black and the red flags for січові стрільці. Як то перекласти січові стрільці? Dr. Luchak, як сказати?
Rifleman.
During World War II. Tech?
One.
It's so familiar. So he's seen, so these graves commemorating those fighters were visible in the western part of Ukraine.
Зараз ця традиція через цю війну, через ці страшні втрати є по всій Україні, і всі українці, незалежно в якій частині вони живуть, переживають той самий досвід втрати своїх рідних і близьких.
And now, because of this war, this tragedy, this loss is felt throughout the entire country, and in all parts of the country, you see people mourning the loss of their loved ones who've fallen.
Зараз немає жодної частини України, яка була б безпечна від ударів російських ракет чи дронів.
At this time, there is no part of Ukraine that is safe from the Russian attacks.
І ця от єдність дуже добре демонструється в соціологічних опитуваннях стосовно історичних питань.
And this unity, it demonstrates itself very well, especially when it comes to questions of history.
Ще зовсім недавно дуже багато речей щодо оцінок українського минулого справді розділяли українців.
Until recently, many things from Ukrainians' past actually divided Ukrainians.
Голодомор – тема, яка по-різному сприймалася в різних частинах України.
Holodomor, the great artificial famine of the 1930s, 1933s famine was one thing that was divisive in Ukraine.
УПА – тема, яка розділяла дуже чітко, тому що там, де діяла УПА на Західній Україні, там їх шанували як героїв, нарешті території до них ставилися часто вороже.
Another example is the Ukrainska Повстанська армія УПА that was heralded as heroes in one part of the country, but not in another part of the country.
Всі соціологічні опитування з 22-го року показують, що 80% українців визнають Голодомор геноцидом по всій Україні. Це вже це абсолютно об'єднуюча тема.
Dr. Luchuk, if I'm misdoing something, please jump in, okay? So in a survey taken in 2022, over 80% of Ukrainians all acknowledged the horror of the artificial famine, the Holodomor. Sure.
Holodomor as genocide.
Yeah, okay. That's the word I was missing is genocide. Okay, yes, it is now universally acknowledged that the Holodomor was in fact genocide.
Поза 70% українців вважають, навіть останнє соціологічне опитування, 80% українців так само вважають українську повстанську армію, вояків української повстанської армії борцями за незалежність України.
70-80% of Ukrainians now acknowledge that the soldiers in the Ukrainska Повстанська армія UPA were heroes of Ukraine.
Кардинально змінилося ставлення до таких постатей, які донедавна представлялися як дуже радикальні, контроверсійні, як, наприклад, Степан Бандера.
Great changes in attitude towards personas, figures that used to be perceived as polarizing, for example, Stefan Bandera.
Найбільш східне місто, в якому з ініціативи місцевої громади з'явилася вулиця Бандери, це Ізюм, Харківська область, це абсолютно близько до фронту.
The most easternmost city with a street now named after Bandera is near Izum, which is in Izum, which is near the front of the war.
І я це веду до того, що Путін досяг протилежних цілей, ніж ті, які він ставив перед собою.
Прошу повторити. This leads to Putin.
Протилежний результат, ніж ті цілі, які він ставив перед собою.
Contrary result to what he expected.
Добре. Так, дякую. So, yeah, Putin has achieved results contrary to what he expected.
Ми маємо зараз найвищий ступінь якогось національного об'єднання і опертого на ключових речах, пов'язаних з українською національною ідентичністю: мова, культура, церква.
Highest level of Ukrainian unity, especially is reflected in language, culture, and church.
Тому ця війна, безперечно, трагедія, тому що ми втрачаємо людей, ми втрачаємо матеріальні ресурси, але разом з тим вона стає базою, основою для нових генерацій, нового покоління, нової ідентичності української.
The tragic loss of people, this war is terrible because of the tragic loss of people, the tragic loss of material resources, but it is also the beginning of a new generation in terms of Ukrainian identity.
Дякую.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a question from Alec Gomelsky. Our friend and contributor, Alec, please open your camera. Thank you, Dr. Luchuk. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because I'm not looking good. I'm still not feeling well, but I would like to participate. And I
Please
would
do.
like to use the opportunity to recommend absolutely fascinating book by Professors Viatrovych and Luchuk called Enemy Archives. It's the brilliant collection of the declassified archival documents of KGB about the Ukrainian movement for independence and Ukrainian national organization, which is absolutely amazing. And I recommend for every scholar in the West, because it's in English and it's very rare that we have such documents in English language. And
I just put it in the chat. I just put the link in the chat. Thank you so much for mentioning this. I just put it in the chat.
Yeah, and another point, returning to your comments, Dr. Viatrovych, about unification of Ukraine. I think in Ukraine should be erected monument to Putin, the greater unificator of Ukraine.
After death of Putin, okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I agree with you because in the East Ukraine that I was born and raised, I could tell you that it was not such feelings of Ukrainian nature, Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture. But with the time being, lots of people in my Kharkiv, or like you said, in Izium, they realized that Bandera is the national hero of whole Ukraine, not just Western Galiciana or something like that. It's the entire, and it's what united Ukraine, and it's what's given the force and possibility to fight Russian advance, Russian aggression, I could tell. Yeah, thank you.
Дякую, Алік. І ви нагадали про нашу з Любомиром Луцюком книжку, і я скористаюся цією нагодою, щоб розповісти про одну історію, яка, як на мене, є дуже показовою.
Okay, thank you, Alec, very much, and thank you for mentioning our book. I'm going to take this opportunity to share a story that is part of this.
Ми з Любомиром робили цю книжку десь 10 років. Насправді забрало багато часу і її підготовка, і головне знайти видавця в солідному академічному установі, такий як врешті вийшов в Могилквін University Press.
So Любомир and I, this project took over 10 years. That included the preparatory work as well as finding an editor and finally ending with an editor of the caliber of McGill University Press.
Але врешті книжка вийшла дуже вчасно. Вона вийшла в 2023 році, коли попит на інформацію про Україну, в тому числі про українську історію, дуже зріс, в тому числі в академічному західному світі.
So the timing actually works pretty good because the book came out in 2023, right when there was a great desire for more information about Ukraine in the political world.
І вона була дуже позитивно спершу сприйнята в західному світі, і ми навіть отримали з Любомиром премію, відзнаку від Американської асоціації бібліотек як краще історичне видання 2023 року.
The book was very well received in the West, and it even received an award from the American Library Association for the best. А що то було найліпше, що?
Відзначили як краще історичне видання 2023 року.
The best historical publication of 2023.
Але в 2024 році російська пропаганда отямилася від перших таких втрат і почала відновлювати свої позиції, в тому числі, на жаль, на Заході.
But in 2024, Russian propaganda renewed its efforts and renewed its efforts. Yeah.
в американському лівому виданні The Nation з'явилася стаття Лева Голінкіна з край критичною оцінкою нашої книжки, яку названо «Глорифікацію нацизму».
So the American left population, the American left-leaning publication, The Nation, published a review by, кто то написал? The review, which dismissed their book as a propaganda.
Про нацизм пропаганда.
Pro-Nazi propaganda.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Причому в цій публікації не навів ані одного речення цитати на підтвердження цієї тези з книжки.
There was not, so the leftist publication, which criticized the book for being Nazi propaganda, did not cite a single sentence from the book as evidence for this.
Але в результаті, очевидно, підтримки інформаційної цієї кампанії, зокрема росіянами, представники Американської асоціації бібліотек вилучили цю книжку з цих переможців історичних матеріалів за 2023 рік. Без жодних коментарів.
Okay, so I need to check something to make sure I understand this correctly. Okay, so as a result of this review, the American Library Association, вони що зробили? Вони
оголосили, що це неправильно було відзнака.
Wow, they nullified the award. Canceled the award. They nullified the award. So this is amazing. So in response to a review published in The Nation, which accused this book of being Nazi propaganda without citing any evidence for it whatsoever, based on that, the American Library Association rescinded, nullified, canceled the award that they had earlier presented to this book, Enemy Archives. Wow. Wow.
Це безперечно було нам дуже неприємно з Любомиром особисто. Ми не отримали жодного листа пояснення з Американської асоціації бібліотек, чому це було зроблено і на якій підставі.
Yeah, obviously for us this was very bad. This was devastating. We had not received a single letter or explanation from the American Library Association explaining why this happened.
Але ще неприємніше для мене було, що ця подія для мене стала знаком того, що Росія знову відновлює свої інформаційні впливи, в тому числі в американському академічному житті.
As unpleasant as it was personally, it's also the bigger concern that Russia is now renewing its efforts in the American academic sphere. Wow. То страшне. То страшне. То невідповідально також. То страшне.
Okay, any questions?
Yes, please. As we're waiting for questions, I need to ask my own. Dr. Viatrovych, you know all about the KGB archives in Ukraine, probably more than anyone. What was the most important part which you did not expect, which came as revelation, something that you found that you didn't think about before? Did you expect everything that you found, or there were things which we didn't know when my generation was growing up in Soviet Union? We didn't know anything, but what would you say?
Напевно, що найбільше здивувало, це об'єми, масштаби цього архіву. Він величезний.
The most surprising thing about this archive was just its sheer size, its hugeness.
Я не думав, що так багато матеріалів збереглося. Мені здається, що зараз в Україні найбільший в світі відкритий архів матеріалів КГБ.
I did not think that so many materials, so many items were preserved, and from what I understand right now, this is the largest archive of KGB materials in the world.
Можливо, більше матеріалів КГБ є в Росії, але ми ще, напевно, доберемося тільки тоді, коли туди дійдуть Збройні Сили України.
Perhaps there is a larger collection, larger archive of KGB materials in Russia, but we'll only know that when we overcome in this war.
Ще одна дещо парадоксальна ситуація склалася таким чином, що найбільше знищених матеріалів стосується періоду, який найближче до нас. Тобто, чим ближче до наших днів, тим більше знищених документів.
So an interesting paradox about all this is that the greatest number of materials that have been destroyed are the ones closest to our time. So the closer the documents are to our time, the more likely they are to have been destroyed.
Справа в тому, що коли Совєтський Союз почав розвалюватися, кегебісти боялися в першу чергу за себе персонально. І вони почали винищувати документи, де могли міститися інформація про них, про їхню участь в репресіях. І це все, що вони встигли знищити, якраз стосувалося кінця 80-х, 70-х років. 60-ті, 50-ті, особливо 40-ві роки чудово збереглися.
So at the fall of the Soviet Union, the KGB operators were afraid very personally for the impact of what's in these archives on them, thereby destroying things from the 70s and 80s, whereas materials from the earlier times, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, those are still more preserved.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is interesting, a very interesting aspect. Anara, please. Anara Tabashalieva, our moderator and history professor, please.
Thank you very much for your profoundly deep and interesting. It's a new approach. Very good discussion. I have the following question. The conflicts today, especially in the Middle East, are called the wars of distorted identities. And Ukraine knows what is distorted identities and how Ukraine might be involved in the Middle Eastern situation and future or current and the future wars in mid-term or long-term. Because Ukraine actually, there was a first war in the modern times, actually, that involved totally different approaches. And that's, for me, it's very interesting to see the bigger picture.
Є два наслідки вже безпосередніх тепер війни на Близькому Сході.
Okay, so there are two наслідки. Що є наслідки? Two results? Yes, there are two results now from the war in the Middle East already.
For Ukraine.
For Ukraine.
По-перше, один дуже практичний. Це, на жаль, в Україні починає бракувати озброєння для збиття російських ракет і захисту українського неба, тому що величезна частина їх використовується у війні проти Ірану.
So the first is a very practical thing, and it is the lack of weapons to defend from Russian attacks and protecting from protecting the skies, because these weapons are now being used in this other conflict.
Другий негативний наслідок, безперечно, це те, що увага до світу, до України зменшується коштом збільшення уваги до Ірану, ситуації в Ірані.
Yeah, the other thing is that there's attention to Ukraine is now significantly lessening, with more attention now focused on Iran.
Але парадоксально є і позитивні результати. Один з них – це затребуваність українського досвіду в війні з Росією, в тому числі на цій арені бойових дій.
A paradoxical result is I'm going to need help here from other people, is the impact, the things learned from the war in Ukraine. I need some, Victor, go ahead and jump in, because I know you understand this better.
I would say the Ukraine is now the contributor. Its experience is very much appreciated by those who don't have this wartime experience.
And not just experience, but also Ukrainian technology.
Expertise, technology, yes.
Yes. І це дає можливість Україні зараз проявити себе як незалежний і впливовий суб'єкт.
This gives Ukraine a chance to show itself as an independent and influential agent.
Ті домовленості, які зараз досягаються з антиіранськими країнами з Близького Сходу, з Арабськими Еміратами, з Оманом і так далі, іншими державами, дають нові можливості для України отримати нових союзників.
these conversations, these negotiations with the countries in the Middle East, and several were mentioned there, gives these new possibilities for Ukraine to create new friendships, new alliances. Does that sound? Yeah, new alliances.
Тому мені здається, що глобально світ зараз, очевидно, дуже змінюється. І Україна має ту перевагу, що ми найбільш готові до тих змін через те, що ми вже станом на тепер найбільше постраждали від них.
Yeah, the world is changing. The world is changing very much right now, and Ukraine is the most ready for these changes because of all the suffering it has recently endured.
Я щойно, буквально цими днями, був на Київському безпековому форумі. Це таке велике зустріч, де приїжджають і закордонні гості, і українські військові.
I was just recently at the Kyiv Security Council, maybe Kyiv Security Forum, Kyiv Security Forum, yeah, which has lots of participants.
З України і за кордоном.
From Ukraine and from beyond Ukraine.
І не сприйміть це як таке самовихваляння, як українця, але українські військові, які були рангами кілька нижчі, звичайні командири рівня батальйонів, навіть не бригад, виглядають більш компетентними і впевненими, ніж генерали НАТО, які надто загально ще досі оцінюють цю ситуацію.
So I don't want to brag as a Ukrainian, but it is very clear that even the lower ranking military commanders, officials of Ukraine outshine the generals and higher commanders of NATO.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anara, for your questions. Please, more comments and questions. We are nearing the end of the hour, and this is very, very fruitful and intense discussion. Please, Dr. Lutzuk, open your microphone, please.
I just wanted to add that a point that Volodymyr made is, I think, very important. Today, in 2026, Ukraine is better known in the world than ever before in human history.
Yes.
So this horrible genocidal Russian war against Ukraine and Ukrainians has a silver lining in the cloud. And that is that despite the losses that Volodymyr mentioned, both material and human, the trauma that Ukrainians are suffering every day, Ukrainians are united as never before, and the world knows Ukraine as never before. And that is, in a sense, the price of this war of independence. So I think that's a very, very critically important thing. When I was a boy, there was no Ukraine. No one spoke about Ukraine except in emigre circles and diaspora and community halls, churches, and so on. The world, my neighbors, my students, my friends, had no idea what a Ukrainian was. So this is an amazing transformation that we are living through. And the role of Ukraine in the 21st century is going to be profoundly different than Ukraine in the previous centuries. As Volodymyr just pointed out, and I just want to underscore it, is I think Ukraine will become, a European power of great consequence. In a sense, Ukraine, the 21st century may belong to Ukraine because of what's happened.
Я додам до того, що говорить Любомир.
I will add to what Lyubomir just said.
І в Україні, і за кордоном багато експертів проводять паралелі між тим, що зараз відбувається, війною, яка відбувається зараз, і війною за незалежність, яка була в Україні 100 років тому.
Both in Ukraine and beyond Ukraine, experts are making parallel comparisons between the war for Ukraine's freedom right now and the war that occurred 100 years ago.
І багатьох це порівняння лякає, тому що тоді українці програли війну.
And these comparisons can be frightening because 100 years ago Ukrainians lost that war.
Я вважаю, що порівнювати треба, але якраз для того, щоб бачити колосальну різницю, яка є між ситуацією тепер і 100 років тому.
I have to say the comparisons actually are necessary to be made because you can see the difference between the situation 100 years ago and today.
І дві головні різниці – це якраз те, що сказав Любомир.
And the two main differences are exactly what Lyubomir just said.
Це максимальна національна єдність всередині країни, чого не було 100 років тому. І це максимальне знання про Україну в світі, чого ще менше було 100 років тому.
Yeah, the heightened unity of Ukrainians within themselves, which was not there 100 years ago, and the knowledge about Ukraine outside Ukraine, which was not there 100 years ago.
Тому, попри те, що зараз, знаєте, стало трохи немодно говорити про якісь шанси для перемоги України.
Не модно, not fashionable to speak about the chances of Ukraine's victory?
Я впевнений, що якраз зараз ми маємо шанси закінчити перемогою нашу столітню війну.
I believe that we now have a chance to conclude with victory our 100-year-long war. Is that right, Dr. Luchuk? 100-year-long war? Yeah. Wow.
It's a war that's been going on for
Yeah.
100 years.
Wow. That's wow.
Well,
Thank you.
1914 to 2026.
Yeah. I want to add too for myself to what Dr. Luchuk said about underscoring the importance of Dr. Viatrovych's comments. How Ukraine is united in Ukraine is also having its parallels here in the diaspora, where Bandera was also a polarizing figure in the diaspora as well. And there were other like things that we in the Ukrainian community would separate ourselves on. But just like in Ukraine, everybody is clearly unified. It's also true in the immigrant communities as well.
Зараз, якщо говорити про цю війну і імміграцію, важливо, що додаткових багато мільйонів українців нових після 22-го року опинились на міграції.
Speaking about war and immigration, it's also true that there's millions more Ukrainians who have immigrated after 2022.
Це, звісно, послаблює Україну.
This obviously is weakening Ukraine.
Але в цьому можна знайти теж джерело для сили.
But this can also be a source of strength.
Тому що якраз українці мають досвід ефективної роботи діаспори для України.
Because Ukrainians have insight into the work of the diaspora for Ukraine.
Якби не робота української діаспори до 1991 року, я впевнений, що визнання України незалежною після проголошення було би набагато складнішим.
Okay, I'm going to need help with this one. From what I'm getting is, if not for the work of the diaspora until 1991,
the struggle of Ukraine for independence would be much harder.
Oh, yeah.
I mean this diplomacy, визнання, дипломатичне визнання, international, як буде визнання?
Recognition.
Yes, international recognition will be
In 1991.
In 1990,
Yes.
it would have been
No,
harder
this
for
makes
Ukraine
sense.
to be recognized. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is so true. I think, Dr. Luchuk, where did you grow up in America, or where did
Well,
you
Canada.
grow up?
Yeah,
Yeah, Canada. Sorry, I apologize. Oh boy, that's my boy. Talk about my imperial United States method mindset.
Thanks a lot.
Sorry about that. Sorry. Okay, so we probably had similar childhoods. What you said. When I was a kid, I'm 60. Nobody knew what a Ukrainian was. Like, you mean Russia? Or you mean part of it? Like, nobody knew, right? And now exactly what Dr. Viatrovych was saying. Now everybody knows very quickly and very dramatically what a Ukrainian is. But I really appreciate the attention to our parents' generation, which from the beginning worked so hard to keep our traditions, keep our culture. And even when it was nobody was listening, they still appealed to their elected officials to please work for free Ukraine, please protect human rights in Ukraine, religious freedoms in Ukraine. There were so many people, that entire generation before us, I think, did pave the way so that when Ukraine became free in 1991. Sorry.
І зараз це ваша місія цих нових прибулих українців навчити, як навіть перебуваючи поза межами України, захищати Україну.
And now it is our obligation, our sacred duty to educate those new arrivals from Ukraine how to support Ukraine, how to continue this work.
Я думаю, що українці мусять стати глобальною нацією.
I think that Ukrainians have to become a глобальная.
Global.
Global, yeah, a global. Ukrainians have to become a global nation.
Yes.
Що означає, що частина українців, очевидно, будуть жити в Україні, а інші можуть і мали би зберегти свою українську ідентичність і допомагати Україні, перебуваючи поза межами України, будучи громадянами інших держав.
Obviously, some Ukrainians will live in Ukraine. Other Ukrainians beyond the borders of Ukraine who have preserved their Ukrainian identity will live as Ukrainians in the diaspora.
Thank you so much, Dr. Viatrovych. This was an amazing hour, and your concept of Ukrainian war for independence, whether right now or over this century, as you demonstrated, it's, I guess, especially important for many, many Americans who now will, in fact, celebrate their 250th independence. And as we don't know what will happen tomorrow, we all are united in wishing for перемога, for Ukrainian victory, and no other end of war is in view here. Thank you so much for being with us this hour.
I want to add just a personal note.
Please,
My translations are horrible, and that anybody watching this should use there's tools out there to really understand, first of all, the beautiful Ukrainian with which Dr. Viatrovych is speaking. It is absolutely a joy to hear Ukrainian when he speaks it, but also the wisdom of what he's saying. So there are mechanisms out there that can render what he said so much better than what you got from me, and I apologize so much to our viewers and especially to our guests.
You don't have to, Katerina, and please, in your beautiful Ukrainian, say a few words to our viewers in Ukraine and across the globe.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!